Finally then, as promised, we're going to take a look at .NET Aspire, which came in .NET 8, has had some enhancements in .NET 9, and to be honest, since I've started using it, I can't see any way of going back. I think it really is a nice way to organise your applications. So let's dive in and take a look. And the way that a lot of people are going to learn about Aspire is to use the template application that we have available. So if you go to New and then Project, and then you can see I've been using it here, we've got this .NET Aspire starter app, and that gives you a reasonably good example of an Aspire application that you can look at and understand what's going on and maybe start adapting. But I'm not going to do that because I think it's quite a hard way, because it puts you into the deep end to some extent. So I'm actually going to take an existing application, one that we've been using over quite a few of the last videos, and turn that into something that uses Aspire. Because the question that I immediately asked myself when I first saw Aspire is, when am I going to want to use this? And the simple answer to that is whenever you have multiple startup projects within your solution. And that's what we've got here. So this is the application that we've been doing lots of things on. It's called Blazor Pre-Rendering because that's how we started out, but we looked at YARP for the reverse proxy and various other things as well. But the important thing is, on this, we have multiple startups. So if we look at startup projects, if we set that correctly, we've got multiple startup projects. So we've got various ones that aren't started, but we've got the API where we're actually getting the data, and the Blazor Pre-Rendering, which is the host for the WebAssembly Blazor app. So if we run that up, then we'll see that we get lots of things starting up. So we get here the browser that's showing us the actual Blazor. Over here, I've also got the browser that I had started to show us the Swagger on the API. And we also get a couple of consoles. So that's the console that's logging on the API itself. And then this one is the console that's logging on the host and showing us the YARP forwarding and that sort of thing. So it's all getting a bit complicated. So what I'm going to do is turn that into an Aspire application and show how much easier that makes things. Now, there's various ways you can do this, but when you've got an existing application, the easiest way is just to take that and convert it. So what I'm going to do is, on firstly that Blazor Pre-Rendering project, so that's the one that's doing the hosting, I'm going to go to Add, and then you can see here we can do Add .NET Aspire Orchestrated Support. And so I'll click on that, and you can see it just gives you some configuration, but I'm going to leave that all to the default and click OK on that. And when it's done its work, you'll see that it's added a couple of things into the solution. And so what we've got is this Blazor Pre-Rendering .app host, and then also this Blazor Pre-Rendering service default. So those are the two things that have been put in. And if we look in that app host, you can see in the program, it's now just got this reference to this Blazor Pre-Rendering project, which is what I just put in here. And if we do the same on the other one that was a startup project, so that was the API, we'll just do the add and then Aspire orchestration on that. And in this case, I'll just add it to the existing one. And you can see that a much smaller change there. It doesn't have to obviously create the host and everything. It just puts in the second one. So we can see there, we've got those two projects. And you'll notice a bit of naming issues, particularly if you look at the project, that the project name is Blazor Rendering.api. Well, you can see here we've got an actual class that's describing that's been generated for us, but you can't have a dot in a class name, so it's changed that to an underscore. But also we've had a label for that, and that one, the dot has been changed to a dash. So a bit confusing, a bit that you've got to juggle, because you've got to think dots or underscores or dashes in different contexts. But once you follow those rules, it's obvious which one we're dealing with. Notice also that we no longer have multiple startup projects. That Blazor Pre-Rendering.app host in bold is the one and only startup project, and it will start the other things that we want when we run it. Now, before we run it, there's one other thing I want to do, because I no longer want to launch the Blazor app directly. So if we just go into the Blazor Pre-Rendering and go into Launch Settings, I'm just going to set that launch browser to false so we don't get that launched. And actually, we should also do that in the API because we've got a browser launch on that. So I'm going to set that to false as well, because the launching is now all going to be handled by Aspire. So now let's run that. And you can see that immediately it's popping up a console, and that console is the console for that Aspire host itself. So that's not for either the front end or the back end, that's Aspire. But what Aspire then launches, and this is the really good bit, is the browser looking like this. And what we can see we've got are the two resources, which are our Blazor application. So that's the one we've got there on 7135. And then we've also got the API, which we've got on 7108 with the Swagger. And so what I can do is simply click on that one, and you can see it takes us to our app, and the app is working in the way that we'd expect. Nothing new there. But we can also go and look at the API, and so if I click on that, we get the API and we get the Swagger. So simpler in terms of the number of windows, we just get this dashboard where we can start launching the things that we want. Only 2 of them here, but even with 2 of them, I think this is much easier to manage what's going on than when you have them separately, as we had before with multiple startups. But even better than that, what about those consoles that we're looking at? Well, looky here. We've got that console, and we can select the console for the host. So there we can see it's logging the forwarding and that sort of thing. Or we can switch to that for the API, and there we can see we've got the logging for the API. We could also get to that by just clicking on them in here. So there we can take it to the console, just another route to the same thing. But as well as that, we've also got some structured logging. So this is where you can actually have a look at where it is and break it down, and not just have the console, but have it much more structured and see what's going on with all of that. We've also got these traces and metrics. So lots and lots of detail as to what's going on, how long each step is taking. I'm not going to look in these in depth, but they are really, really powerful if you need to do some sort of performance checking. And we've also got metrics where we can choose metrics for one of those, and again, get lots of information about what's being called and how long it's taking, and graphs to show us, and all that we're being given pretty much automatically. So really, really powerful stuff we've got in here. Now, let's just take a look at what's doing all of that. So if we go back to look at Visual Studio, we saw we had the program in here. So that's what is saying those are the 2 things we want to run. So we're saying we're putting in the pre-rendering API, and then we're going to run that using this distributed application, which is what we get with Aspire. Changes that have been made to the actual projects we've configured for that, we can actually see if we just look at the Git changes, because if we take a look at the program for, let's say, the host, then we can see that what it's done, a couple of changes, it's done this add service defaults, and then it's done a map default endpoints. And if we look at the other program, then you can see it's really done the same thing. So when I added the Aspire orchestration, as well as creating those 2 projects, it also just put those into the 2 existing projects. Where are those coming from, those add service defaults and those map default endpoints? Well, we can take a look at that, because they're coming in this other project we saw, which was the Blazor pre-rendering service defaults. And in there, we've got this extensions.cs, which is what we're looking at there. And we can see that that's where it has an extension method called add service defaults. And it's got somewhere down here, there it's got the map default endpoints. And this is basically where it configures all of that stuff that's happening in terms of the telemetry and the metrics and all the things that we saw down here. So if you want to change what you're getting there, you can dive in here and start making changes. And I'm not going to go into that, certainly on this video, because it really is, as you can see, quite complicated. But there's lots and lots of stuff you can do in there. But I'd just leave that as the default for now. So that's our basic Aspire application, and we can see already how powerful that is in terms of just giving us this dashboard that really is what does the work for us. But there's one other big advantage we get as well, which I mentioned in the earlier videos as a bit of a problem that we might have, and that was the configuration of the various addresses. Because remember, we've got to have our Blazor pre-rendering app talking to our API. The API is going to be on 7108, and that means that in our app settings there, we had to have the 7108 for the API directly, and also we needed that because we had that for the reverse proxy. And so that means if we then switch to a different configuration, or ultimately when we go live, you've got to make those changes in various places. And that's a really nice thing that we can also deal with Aspire. Because what we can do is go to the app host program and start making a few changes here. Because what we want to happen is for the host, which is the client in this situation, to automatically pick up the configuration from the API, which is the server. So this is what we do for that. So as I say, it's this one, the host that is dependent upon the API. And so what I'm going to do is actually say here var API equals. So each one of these add projects gives you back, if you want to make use of it, an object that represents the orchestrated project. So we'll do that, and then we'll create the second one afterwards. But then what I'm going to do is on here, I'm going to say dot, and then with reference, and then with reference to the API. So that thing that I just created there. So that will now mean that they know about one another. And then also something that's a good idea to put in here, we can also do a dot wait for, and then also API. And that just means that it won't start up the front end until the back end has started up, which obviously can be an issue if it's a slow startup for some reason, so it'll wait for it. So that now means that the client in this case knows about the server. What that then means we can do is in the app settings for the client, so that's this one here, we can get rid of that explicit address, and we do this. We put in HTTPS plus HTTP, so that just means this will work for either HTTPS or HTTP, and then colon // and then rather than putting a genuine URL in there, we actually take that name, which remember was the Blazor rendering dash API based on the name of the project, and that's what we put in there. And so having done that, that means that when that's read in, if we look in the program here, remember that was being read in at this point here, looking up that API, and that will, within the HTTP client, be used to look up the actual address that we want. So the key thing is, though, there is now no explicit reference. Well, actually there is, because I haven't changed this one. I'll come to that. But there's no explicit reference in there for what's going on. Let's actually change that one as well, and then I can show you why we've got to do a bit more there. So we'll put that one in there on the reverse proxy, and then we'll run that up, and we'll go to the front end, click on that, and you can see that seems to be all working fine. Remember, just thinking about the pre-rendering what's happening there, that, remember, is making a direct call from the hosting application to the API. The point is that is not using the reverse proxy. The only time we use the reverse proxy is when we go away and come back, and you can see there we're getting an error. So that configuration in Aspire has worked for the actual API because it's pretty much built in when we're using the HTTP client that we're looking at there, but it's not built in to when we're using YARP. We've got to do a bit of extra work to get that going. But already it's pretty powerful that it means we don't have to worry about that configuration, and if we change the port or change the address, it'll just follow it automatically. Let's get that working for the reverse proxy because it's pretty simple. What we need to do is in the Blazor pre-rendering, which is where the reverse proxy is, we're going to add another NuGet package. And what we're going to look for here is a thing called service discovery.yarp. And you can see there, we've got Microsoft extension service discovery YARP. And if we just add that in there, and then all we need to do is back in the program, where we add the reverse proxy, that's where we're loading in the data from the settings, which is where we're using this new format that it didn't recognize for the address. What we're going to do is on the end of that, we just do a dot, and then you can see it's already got it in there, this add service discovery destination resolver. Basically, that's a long way of saying that is the thing that looks at this format and works out what the address is supposed to be. So just with that extra line of code and the NuGet package, we can now, when we run that up, we can now go in there. That one was working before, but the important thing is now when we go away and come back, that's the one that's using the reverse proxy, and it's now got the appropriate address. And so there is now absolutely nothing in the code for the client that we've got in here that knows anything about the specific address that that's going to be on. It's all handled by Aspire, which is really pretty nice here. But if you imagine you've got lots of microservices, they can be a nightmare to maintain when you're trying to do this for development. And so it will keep going with all of that. So that's pretty good. There's obviously lots of other features that we have in Aspire. Just one I wanted to show you. Remember we'd added the Swagger into the hosting service, again using the reverse proxy. Well, you can see here we can obviously start up the API itself and go to the Swagger for that, or if we wanted to do that through the hosting service, then we'd have to, at the moment, do that manually. So we'd go there, that gives us the Blazor, and then we could obviously put in the /Swagger, and we can see that gives us the Swagger. But you can see we've got various endpoints. All we've really got as alternatives are just the HTTP and the HTTPS, but you can actually take a bit of control of that and put things in for yourself. So we can do that. Now, the thing to watch out for here, which may catch you out, is that when we did the add Aspire orchestration, it gave us a slightly old version of the NuGet packages. So if you look at the app host itself and look at the NuGet packages, we can see that there is an update available on this Aspire hosting app host. And so let's update that one because we'll get a few nice new features in there, which is what I wanted to use here. So we'll go up to 9.2.1, just accept all of that. And that now means when we go to the program, we can do something else. Now, it's a little bit fiddly to do this because in order to add this to the Blazor pre-rendering entry on the dashboard, I have to have access to that. So I'm going to put this into a variable, which we'll just call host, and then just do a bit of tidying up with all of that. And then do a further phase of configuration where I'm going to say host dot, and then I'm going to say with URL, and this with URL is something that only came along with that upgrade on the NuGet package. So it won't be there with the standard package. And then what we do with that, we put in a string interpolation. And what I need to do in here is get hold of the basic address for that host project. So I say host.get endpoint, and then I ask for the HTTPS endpoint. I could do it for both HTTPS and HTTP, but I'm just going to do the one for now. And then on to the end of that, I'm going to put the /Swagger. So that will take us to that particular endpoint. And then I'm going to give that a display name. And so we're just going to call that Swagger. Seems pretty good. And so having done that, we'll now see that when we run that up, it's had to hide it away because we're getting a bit short of space there. But we can see if we drop that down, as well as the HTTP and the HTTPS, we've now got the Swagger. And if I click on the Swagger there, we can see that it's all working. But notice that is the Swagger on 7135, different from what we get down here, which is the Swagger on 7108. That's the one on 7135 that's going through the reverse proxy. So that's all good. Problem we now have, though, is it's a bit ugly that we've got this nice friendly name Swagger, whereas things like the actual Blazor have got just the URL. So we can fix that as well in a very similar way. So if we go in here on the end of that with URL, I'm also going to put another one with URL for endpoint, which again only came in with this update on the NuGet package. And this one, I'm going to again just put in HTTPS on there. But then what I'm going to do is use a lambda. I'm going to say URL gives, and then basically there's all sorts of things you could modify on that URL. Quite a lot you could change where it's pointing to, but I'm simply going to change the display text. And just like we were setting the previous one to Swagger, I'm going to set this one to Blazor. And so that should now mean that when we run that up, we should see that it just displays it in a slightly more friendly way. And so there you can see we've got the Blazor that takes us to the actual application, or we've got the Swagger that takes us there. So you can configure that how you like. So we've seen the basics of what we have with Aspire there. We've only got the two projects, but already you can see how nice it is, both in terms of giving you the dashboard and also automating the configuration of the URLs. We've seen a bit of fiddling around with that, with the way we can add extra endpoints, though obviously there is far more that we can do with Aspire than what we've seen there. And we will look at that in some future videos. Things you can do, you can include Docker containers for different features that you want, and also it will help you with deployment to Azure or to some other cloud platform. So, I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, do click like, do subscribe, and I'll see you for the next video.